This memory has been on my mind a lot lately. My youngest son Luke just went off to college, and while I'm proud of him, the house feels quieter than it ever has before. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. It's funny, when the kids are young, you dream of peace and quiet, but when it finally comes, it's not as comforting as you thought it would be. I don't know why, but his going away unlocked a part of my brain that honestly forgot about what I'm about to tell you. People have told my wife and I that it's normal to be thinking a little extra about memories from my kid's childhood at a time like this, so I guess it's not too surprising. I still remember when he was just a little kid, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into something. There's one memory I have of that time that is definitely not all sunshine and rainbows though. Luke was 8 years old when this happened. Even now, I can't fully make sense of it. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I'm pretty good with my hands. Always have been. I will admit that I was much more lively back then, willing to undertake all sorts of makeshift projects and such. One of my favorite projects was the treehouse I built for Luke in the backyard, which is still standing to this day. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it. Walls, a roof, proper wooden steps leading up to the entrance. It was sturdy too. I wanted it to feel like an extension of our house to him, and I definitely succeeded in that regard. My wife Christy wasn't thrilled about it at first. She worried it was too high off the ground and unsafe. But Luke was the kind of kid who was always climbing trees anyway, and I figured it would be safer to give him a proper ladder rather than let him scramble up branches that could snap. Christy eventually came around, and Luke absolutely loved it. I should probably tell you a little bit about our property so that the story makes more sense. Our house was at the very end of a dead-end street in a relatively woodsy area. The backyard actually bordered the woods, which was part of why Christy and I fell in love with the house in the first place. It was private and peaceful, and we're kind of people that like keeping to ourselves. I still laugh when I think about all the times friends and family members have gotten lost trying to find our house. The yard wasn't huge, but I could clearly see the treehouse from our bedroom window, which was one of the deciding factors when I was determining where to build it. I wanted to be able to keep an eye on it should Luke hurt himself or something like that. I couldn't actually see inside of it because of the walls, but I had a perfect view of the steps leading up to it. From what I remember, everything was relatively normal for a pretty long time. Luke spent what I considered a normal amount of time playing in the treehouse. His older brother had kind of outgrown that phase, so Luke mostly played by himself in there. I can't remember exactly when, but at one point he started talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. We knew it was an imaginary friend because no one in the neighborhood had a child named Jake. It wasn't unusual for kids to have imaginary friends, but Luke was 8, not exactly the age where you'd still expect that sort of thing. Christy thought it was cute and innocent, but I was a little more skeptical. It seemed odd to me since Luke hadn't been the type of kid to make imaginary friends. Regardless, I didn't think much of it because he was only 8 years old. It started to get a little more concerning when Christy and I realized that Luke was starting to spend more and more time up there. What struck me as strange was that he wasn't bringing toys up there. As far as I could tell, he only had his imagination to play with. It's not like he had a game console or anything to keep him entertained, and I had been very clear about not carrying anything up there alone, as it was dangerous and I didn't want him to fall. At one point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him about it. Luke acted extremely weird when I asked him about his friend, and said that Jake was shy and didn't like being talked about. When I asked him why he was spending so much time up there, he told me that Jake only liked to play in the treehouse, and that he didn't like coming inside. I honestly didn't know what to say. It seemed like a pretty bizarre condition. Were an imaginary friend supposed to be available wherever and whenever you needed them? I did some research later that day and found out that some kids only play with their imaginary friends in certain rooms of their house, so as weird as it was, I accepted it. Christy was pretty uneasy though. She thought Luke was taking this imaginary friend thing too far, and I honestly agreed. We weren't helicopter parents though. When it came to our kids, we let them spend their free time however they wanted to, as long as they were doing well in school and completing their chores. Most weekends, we'd let Luke play with the neighborhood kids until the sun went down. They'd ride bikes, play tag, and usual stuff. They were all good kids, and we trusted Luke to behave himself and stay out of trouble. He wasn't the type of kid to pick on other kids or get into fights, which was why I was especially concerned when Luke came home one Saturday with a black eye. I cleaned him up and asked him what happened. He looked down at the floor and didn't say anything, but I insisted that he tell me what happened and I wouldn't be mad at him. What he said next made me shiver. He looked up at me and told me that he had gotten into a fight with Jake. I had to process whose kid Jake was before realizing that he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie to me and that he wasn't being funny. Instead of fessing up, Luke just started crying and ran to his room. Christy was convinced he'd gotten into a fight with one of the neighborhood kids and didn't want to admit it. I agreed with that. She wanted me to take down the treehouse right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. That treehouse had taken weeks of hard work, and the thought of tearing it down didn't sit right with me. I told her that I'd talk with Luke and tell him that he was taking things way too far. Luke refused to come out of his room or talk to me for the rest of the day, so getting something out of him wasn't going to happen. The next day, I decided to investigate. When I climbed up into the treehouse, what I saw made my stomach churn. Scattered around were children's socks and sneakers, all dirty and tattered. I knew for a fact that none of them belonged to Luke. I also knew for a fact that they weren't my older son's either. We had donated all of his old shoes a long time ago. That's not all that was up there. There were also food wrappers, bags, utensils, even a couple of dirty plates. Weirdest of all, there were pencil drawings of wild animals on all the walls. There was a fox, a bear, some deer. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember that they were all animals. The one that stood out to me the most was what appeared to be a gigantic spider with a face that was just completely penciled over. It was just downright freaky. I immediately climbed down and asked Luke about the treehouse. He told me that Jake only liked to talk on a full stomach, so he had to bring him food and other snacks. He then told me that the shoes and socks were also Jake's, and that Jake was pretty forgetful in general. That was it. From that moment on, I forbade Luke from going into the treehouse. I knew he was still lying to me, and I wanted to punish him until he admitted to it. I was 100% sure that Luke had found those things around the neighborhood and was making up stories to cover it up. Christy was worried about Luke's mental health, and I was too. We thought about consulting a professional should things continue. But one evening, I saw something that changed everything. I was looking out the bedroom window when I spotted movement near the treehouse. At first, I was livid that Luke was disobeying me, but then I realized what I was looking at. A sickly, frail-looking child was climbing down the treehouse steps. It wasn't Luke. He didn't look like any of the kids from the neighborhood either. His clothes were dirty, and he moved like he hadn't eaten in days. I ran outside, yelling for that kid to stop. As soon as I opened the back door, the boy darted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was freakishly fast. Within seconds, he disappeared into the trees. Christy called every parent in the neighborhood, but all their kids were accounted for. We called the police, who searched the woods thoroughly for over an hour but found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the area either. The whole thing was beyond explanation. With my consent, the police questioned my son about that kid, and what he told them was horrifying. Apparently, Jake claimed to be a magic boy who lived in the woods with his other friends. His friends were supposedly all animals, as he called them bear, fox, and names like that. Every time Jake would come to visit my son, he'd beg him to leave his family behind and join him in the woods with the rest of his friends. He'd then get mad when Luke would refuse and make these strange noises. I don't know why Luke never told me any of it, and there was a part of me that felt responsible for putting him in danger like that. The police conducted a full search of the woods but never found a thing. We never saw Jake again after that. Christy has always been incredibly superstitious and theorized that Jake wasn't real. I don't believe in stuff like that, but the way she talks about it always gives me an unsettling feeling. I honestly don't know which explanation is freakier, the fact that some paranormal entity was interacting with my son, or the thought that there might be woods folk lurking around somewhere in the forest behind my house. First, I'll start off with descriptions of all of those involved. My name is Kelsey. I was 17 years old at the time of this event. I'm 5'3". My friend Haley's 5'8". My friend Sammy is 5'7". It was March 19th, 2016. I was dog sitting at my mom's friend's house for some extra cash to help me out before going off to college next year. It was a cool spring night, and the people I was dog sitting for have a super cool sunroom where my friends and I like to smoke, so I decided to invite 2 of my other friends over to spend the night and make this whole dog sitting thing more fun. Haley and Sammy were a little older, with Haley being 23 and Sammy being 22. They brought over some vodka for us to drink. We hung out for a couple hours, drinking, smoking, laughing, and catching up. Then we start to get a bunch of phone calls. Now normally this would not be weird, except for the fact that the phone was supposed to be disconnected. We ignore the first couple phone calls, thinking they'll leave a message or a call back in the morning, as it was nearly midnight. The calls were persistent, and we could tell this person was not going to leave us alone until we answered. Sammy decided to answer the phone, and there was a man on the line, claiming to have the owner's wallet at a gas station 25 minutes from the house, which did not make sense. This man insisted that we come pick up the wallet now, which we all found extremely odd. After minutes of this man insisting that it was urgent that we come pick up the wallet, Sammy finally got the man to understand that we were not leaving the house and that we'll get it in the morning. We hung up the phone and all got a weird feeling in our stomachs. We grabbed the dog Willis and run into the back bedroom, shut all the blinds, and locked the door. We already have impaired judgment because of the weed and booze. We talk things out, and we decide we were just being paranoid, and the man was just trying to make sure we get the wallet back to the owner safely. Hours go by of us drinking and smoking some more. Then we decide to watch a funny movie and make some food to calm down and get ready for bed that night. We move from the sunroom to the living room and pop in a DVD. The sunroom is located in between the kitchen and living room of the house and the backyard by the pool. The door in between the pool and the sunroom does not have a lock on it, but the door that's in between the kitchen living room and the sunroom does not have a dog door for Willis to go out back to go to the bathroom. So we all agree that, although we were a little spooked by the phone call, we were in a safe neighborhood, and Willis would bark if anything were to come to the door. Time creeps by. We were laughing on the couches, Haley and I sitting next to each other on one, and Sammy across the room on the other. The clock struck 3 a.m., and that's when things started to get creepy. Remember earlier how we left the lockable door open to the sunroom so that Willis could get outside to pee? That's where he entered from. I'm fully immersed in the comedy, but do you ever get that unexplainable feeling that you're being watched by somebody? That feeling suddenly became overpowering. I turn towards the kitchen and see a dark mass hunched over in the kitchen. I freeze and for a second think I'm seeing things. I watch as this mass reaches up into the cabinet, and that's when I realize there's someone in the house. I nudge Haley's side with my elbow and say real quietly, "Haley, I think there's somebody in the house." She looks into the kitchen and screams bloody murder. This dark mass then whips his head around and looks directly at me. We make eye contact, and I felt my entire body tense up. All I could see were his piercing blue eyes contrasting against the orange lamp just below the cabinet on the table. Everything else was covered by his black hoodie, pants, shoes, and gloves. He even wore a ski mask that covered up to his nose and mouth. Sammy then gets up to look at what Haley and I are staring at, and somehow musters up the courage to yell, "Get the fuck out." He calmly closes the cabinet and slowly walks out the sunroom doors. We immediately get up and rush to the corner of the room farthest from where he was crouching and call 911. They arrive 3 minutes later and search the entire apartment, take our statements, and sit outside the house for the rest of the night to see if the intruder would come back. The 3 of us did not stick around long enough to see if he would. We leave our booze, weed, and my car all at the house with the cops and the dog and head home. We come back the next day to find clothes all throughout the house messed with, and crumbs by the doggy door, understandably so Willis wouldn't bark at whoever came in. To this day, we still have no idea who called us and or who came into that house. I have not been back since. This is a disturbing memory from my young childhood. I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mom would usually take my brother and I trick-or-treating, but this particular year, after school, she dropped me off at my friend Sean's house, where Sean, our friend Johnny, and I would go together. Johnny and Sean were a year older than me. We met while I was playing with my brother on the block. Johnny and Sean lived around the block from me. Sean had a weird upbringing that I never really understood. His sister was like 20 years old. There was a big gap between them. She was always his caretaker, it seemed, whenever I was at his house. His house always smelled like cat, and his sister always had a different guy over, it seemed like. His sister was always cold to me, in the sense that she'd never acknowledge me or say hi or anything. Sean's dad was never in the picture, and his mom, I believe, was always working out of town, I guess. I only met Sean's mom a few times. We never really stayed in touch for long enough for me to figure all of this out. Anyway, my mom dropped me off at Sean's, expecting that Sean's mom would be trick-or-treating with us. After saying goodbye, I went into his house. Johnny was already there. We all had big pillow sacks to fill with candy. This was around the time that I learned that neither Sean's mom nor sister were coming with us to supervise. I was young, so I sort of felt slightly uncomfortable knowing that Johnny and Sean would be leading the way, but at the same time, I felt a sense of excitement that we'd have more freedom. I knew for a fact my mom would not have approved of us going unsupervised though. So eventually, we were off into the neighborhood, walking around doing our rounds door to door. Quite a few people asked if we were alone or where our parents were, and Johnny would always be the one to use the same lie, that his mom is up ahead with his sister. It worked every time. This was on a Friday, so we didn't get to start at trick-or-treating until around 5 o'clock. But we didn't have school the next day, so we intended on going until our pillow sacks were completely full. We took a break after a couple of hours and went to Sean's, where he heated up a bunch of frozen pizzas. At the time, I was so jealous of the apparent freedom he had in his house, not having parents who cared about what he did. But looking back now, I count myself super blessed to have grown up in a household with 2 strict parents. After we hung out at his house for an hour and watched Halloween specials on Nickelodeon while eating pizza and candies, Johnny eventually was picked up by his mom, but Sean and I wanted to keep going, so we eventually headed back out for round 2. It was dark out now, and it had to be past 8 p.m. There were a lot less trick-or-treaters now. We tried to go to certain blocks we hadn't gone down yet, which meant straying further away from Sean's house. We found a block we hadn't touched yet and continued knocking on doors. Some houses didn't answer at this hour, and mostly everyone else had a comment about us being alone or how it's getting late. We noticed a man pushing a stroller a couple houses down behind us. He was walking very slowly in our direction, probably a dad trick-or-treating for his young child. As we continued going door to door, the man with the stroller got closer. Eventually, we heard him going shh and singing softly. Eventually, he caught up to us, and he said, "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" And we replied, "Good," at the same time. And then he said, "It's pretty late. I'm on my way back to my house. I can give you guys the rest of my candy." Sean and I looked at each other with telling faces, as if we just hit the jackpot. Sean asked what kind of candies, and he said a bunch of bags of different things. He said he didn't get to give much away because he wanted to take his daughter out for a trick-or-treat stroll. He did have a bag dangling on one of the handles of the stroller, which was filled with some candies. The stroller was fully covered by a folding piece on the top, so we couldn't see his daughter. He said she's asleep and he didn't want to wake her up, but he pointed ahead and said his house is just up this way. So we followed behind him as he pushed the stroller. He was walking a little faster now. As we walked, I realized there was next to no one else out at this point, even though it was a Friday night. It seemed like a quieter side of the neighborhood. The man talked to us as we walked, asking us questions. What part of the neighborhood we were from, where we went to school, basic stuff. I let Sean answer most of the questions. Him being even just a year older than me at that age, I felt like he was the one who should take lead. On multiple occasions as we walked, the man would lean into the stroller and talk in a high pitch to his daughter. Then he'd turn back and smile at us. We finally made it to his house. He led us up the walkway with the stroller and unlocked his door. After he opened it, he brought the stroller with his daughter inside first, and then invited us to come inside. Sean led the way, so I followed. I was the one to ask if we could leave the door open, and the man paused and then said, "Yeah, of course." He said he'll be right back as he goes to get the candy bags. He pushed the stroller into the middle of the living room, only about 10 feet away from where we were standing. I nudged Sean because I felt uncomfortable. I whispered, "Why would he leave the candy so far away?" Sean didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the living room and then walked up to the stroller. He lifted up the folding part that was covering the baby
and he looked disturbed. He hurried back to me, whispering, "Let's go." He was full on running once we got outside, and I followed behind, which was a bit tougher because we had those heavy pillow sacks. I still was confused about what he saw, but just then, we heard a woman's voice yell, "Excuse me." It was one of his neighbors. She came running over to us and asked if we know that man, and it was at this point that Sean spilled the beans and said he offered us his leftover candy, but he was pushing a stroller with a fake baby in it. I remember getting goosebumps as he said that. The woman said, "Yeah, that man doesn't have a child. I saw you walking by with him." She took us to our car and drove each of us home. I know, getting into a stranger's car after that was another questionable move. The woman came to my front door to talk to my mom about what we just told her. My mom was distraught. After I told her every last detail about the night, she sent me to my room while my parents called the police on that man. My parents never told me anything about what happened after that. I believe they wanted to shelter me from any more exposure to the situation. My mom didn't want me going over to Sean's house anymore, and I know she had quite a bit to say to Sean's mom. I did see Sean at school once in a while still, and we'd remain cordial, but our friendship was never the same after that night.
This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, and I usually stick to late night shifts. The roads are quieter and the tips are better, but there is a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I'd always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, even came close to being as strange as what I'm about to tell you. I didn't have a dash cam at the time, and that night was the main reason I installed one. It started off normal enough, just me and the odd sounds my car would occasionally make. I've got this beat up 2005 Volvo, but it's reliable as hell. The streets were quite literally deserted, which like I said earlier, I preferred. Sometime after 2 p.m., I got a request from a convenience store nearby. Seemed harmless at first, but for some reason, I got this weird feeling in my gut about it. You ever get that feeling like something's off, but you can't explain why? That's exactly what hit me as I drove up. Before I even saw the guy, I figured out why I was getting that gut feeling. The convenience store I was pulling up to was closed, all the lights were off, and there was not a single car in the lot. As I pulled closer, I saw him. I made sure to drive pretty slowly so I could get a good look at him. He was pacing outside the store, wearing this ratty hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. I'm not kidding about that. There was literally a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he thought someone was after him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I probably should have just canceled the ride and driven away. I even hovered my finger over the cancel button, but I didn't for whatever reason. I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. I regretted my decision the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most people either scroll on their phones or stare out the window, but not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror, not blinking, not looking away, just staring directly at me. I tried not to stare back, but I couldn't help but catch his eye a couple of times. He looked kind of angry, which was also pretty unsettling. I tried to ignore him and turned on the radio to break the silence. I don't even remember which station I clicked on, but the moment the music started playing, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell he was a smoker right away. That kinda caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little bit. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror and just did as he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I didn't say anything, and we drove in silence for a while. I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we got to his stop. That's what I was hoping for, at least. But then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. He just leaned back and muttered something to himself that I couldn't hear. Then he started going on about how he used to be an Uber driver and he quit because some punks stole some stuff from his car. He was slurring his words a bit, so I couldn't make out everything he said, but I got the gist of the story for the most part. I looked in the mirror once or twice while he was telling me the story, and I realized he was smiling the whole time, which was incredibly unsettling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. He concluded his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That comment was what did it for me. I started thinking about him as more of a threat than just a crazy drug addict. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do about it. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline, but the guy did not know when to stop talking. He kept babbling about nonsense, some of it concerning and some of it just gibberish. I honestly couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone, although I don't think it was me. He began insinuating that he had just done something awful and that he was a bad person. He kept saying, "I didn't mean it," repeatedly, followed by a few frantic "I'm sorries." I didn't respond, worried that he'd do something if I did. I didn't know what he'd done or what he was capable of, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he snapped out of his muttering haze and yelled at me that I had missed the turn. I didn't miss it. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over, so that's what I did. My hands were shaking at that point. I just wanted the nightmare to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it crept down the road, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying almost perfectly flat on my back seat with his eyes closed. I whipped my head back around before he saw me, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed in that position for a really uncomfortable amount of time. I wanted to ask him to leave, but decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me I had gotten lucky. Before I had a chance to do anything, he opened my car door and disappeared. I ended up calling my shift short after that. I was shaken up and didn't feel like driving around anymore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I came across something on my phone that proved how dangerous of a situation I had been in. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed on the night I picked up that passenger. It was 2 blocks from where I had picked that guy up. It makes me sick knowing I was inches away from a dangerous criminal who could have harmed me if he had chosen to. I'm a little scared to contact the police about this. I try to avoid law enforcement for various personal reasons I won't get into. I'm not really sure if my report would even help. Either way, I'm much more cautious about who I let in my car. My name is Cadence. I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of my town. The place is right off the highway, but the parking lot also has a back entrance that's available to the general town. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same rotation of classic rock for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a stiff drink. I like it though. The routine is predictable, the tips are surprisingly decent, and I've learned how to handle the usual bar crowd. The talkers, the flirters, the quiet drinkers, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends are obviously a lot more hectic, but the thing about working during the week is that I'm expected to work my night shifts alone. I don't even get a bar back to pop in now and again. Yeah, it's obviously easier work and slower during the week, but I miss the company of my coworkers. I tend to be pretty vigilant during my shifts because we do get the occasional bar fight considering the kinds of crowds we attract. That's why I clocked the guy immediately. It was sometime after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his late 40s, but he was extremely clean cut and well groomed. Not the kind of look you'd expect from a guy his age in an area like this. He was wearing a black turtleneck underneath a black trench coat. Definitely well dressed, but casual about it. I'm not sure how to explain it.
but he had this aura of sophistication about him that makes you think of money. Real money, not the loud look at me kind. He glanced around slowly before walking swiftly over to the bar and taking a seat. I also remember him having oddly good posture, but that's neither here nor there. When I walked over, he glanced at the bottles behind me and ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I was pouring his drink, he asked me if I liked working here with a smile on his face. It was a normal enough question, so I answered him honestly. I told him yeah and smiled back. I then made a joke about being a bartender or something. I wish I could say I got a creepy vibe from him, but that's not the energy he was giving off. He genuinely seemed like a stand-up guy, kind of like the single dad at his kid's baseball game that gives the whole team a high five. He chatted with me for a bit, which I didn't mind since the bar was pretty quiet at that point. Eventually, he asked me if I ever thought about doing something bigger, which I admit was somewhat bizarre. Again though, not a totally creepy question given the nature of the situation. I gave him my standard bartender smile and told him I was happy for now. He nodded and sipped his drink, seemingly disappointed at my answer for reasons I didn't understand. After a long pause, he asked me what time I got off out of nowhere. That question surprised me. I hadn't picked up any kind of flirting from him whatsoever, so I was a little disappointed to discover that our conversation had just been another one of those empty attempts at getting my number. I smiled and gave him a vague answer, trying to brush him off in a friendly way without seeming uptight. Before he could answer, I busied myself and began wiping down the counter, but he didn't press. He just smiled like he already knew, then drained his drink and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laying it gently on the bar like it was nothing. Then, without another word, he walked out into the night. I didn't really know what to make of the encounter. I know it sounds like nothing, but his demeanor was just so far off my radar that I was intrigued. Either way, I figured I was never going to see him again and got on with my life. As it would turn out though, I was wrong. About a week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. She drew my attention since I hadn't seen her before. She looked like she was in her mid-30s and was dressed in a way that didn't quite match her age. Trendy, but off, like someone trying a little too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. I watched her closely as the two of them approached the bar. Everything about her seemed calculated, from the way she smiled too easily to the way she leaned against the bar like we were already friends. As I was setting down napkins in front of them, the very first thing she said to me wasn't a hello or a drink order, but a compliment. She put on this overly joyful smile and said, "You're so pretty." Her fingers brushed against my arm as she said it, lingering just a second longer than normal. I laughed and thanked her, but I could instantly tell that something was off about this woman. The man didn't speak, which I thought was also a little strange given that he had been so talkative last time. They ordered drinks and poured them, and that's when questions came flooding in. The woman asked me how long I'd been working here, along with how old I was and a bunch of other small talk questions like that. I answered in short, polite sentences, but I got the sense that this wasn't small talk. She was studying me. At one point, she looked over at the man, and it seemed like they were communicating despite not speaking. She looked back at me and told me that she ran an exclusive event club. She leaned in a bit as she said it, lowering her voice as if to prevent her being overheard by another patron. She told me that she's always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that I'd make a killing, 10 grand for a weekend. I let out a small, forced laugh and told her it sounded too good to be true. She insisted that it was real, and told me that a bunch of girls like me worked for them. Her smile never faltered at any moment, which was starting to creep me out. She steered the conversation back to the job, circling around the same words. Fun, safe, exclusive. Then, casually, she said, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." My pulse kicked up. I wasn't playing around at that point. I didn't even bother pretending like I wasn't creeped out. "I'm good," I said in a firm voice. No smile on my face this time. Just then, a group of customers walked in, laughing and talking loudly. The woman's expression changed in an instant.
her friendly mask slipping just slightly before she turned to the man beside her. Without another word, they left. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't unsettled after that. Those random people had just propositioned me for God knows what. I told my coworkers and my boss about the situation, and we all agreed to keep an eye out should those people return. My boss assured me that he was always a 15-minute drive away should I need him, and the bar's security cameras were typically enough to deter any misbehavior. There wasn't really much I could do beyond that. It's not like those people had done anything illegal. I tried to push it out of my head, but a few nights later, after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin like static. As I walked to my car, I kept my head down, my keys clutched tight in my hand. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed. It stayed back just enough to avoid suspicion, but every turn I made, it was still there. I took a random turn onto a side street, and it followed. Another, still there. I started freaking out internally. I knew it was them. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Then, without hesitating, I navigated and pulled into the parking lot of a police station, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles practically turned white. The second I pulled in, the car sped off. Nothing happened after that for a while, but I knew it wasn't over. It turned out I was right. It was a slow weekday shift, barely anyone coming in. By midnight, I was wiping down the counter, half thinking about closing early, when the door creaked open. It was the woman. I immediately sent my boss a text as inconspicuously as I possibly could. I looked back up, and the woman was staring at me with that same artificial smile. She walked slowly to the bar and sat down with her hands folded neatly. I was debating just telling her to leave when she said, "Thought I'd come check on you." My stomach started twisting, but I did my best to hide it. I told her we were about to close and that she had to leave, but she made this pouty face and asked for just one old-fashioned. I thought about denying her, but I figured pouring the drink would stall her long enough for my boss to arrive. So I turned around and got started, trying to keep my cool. And then I heard it. The soft, unmistakable click of the front door shutting. I whipped around. The woman was gone. I felt this awful pit in my stomach as I stepped toward the entrance. Through the glass, I saw it. A black van idling just outside. Without thinking, I locked the door as quickly as I could. But then, metal rattling from the back door. Someone was trying to get in. I didn't think. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could, a metal shaker, and clutched it like a weapon as I dialed 911 with my other hand. There was no way the police would get there in time, so I thought about making a run for it out the front door, but I didn't for whatever reason. I was bracing myself for a fight when I saw headlights pulling into the lot. It was my boss. The sounds on the back door suddenly stopped, and a few seconds later, the van pulled out of the lot with a screech. I embraced my boss and told him what had happened, and he said he had gotten the license plate of the van as it was leaving. When the cops arrived, my boss reviewed the security footage with them. It was worse than I had imagined. Just before the woman left, the cameras had captured two masked figures crouching near the front door, waiting. There was another person in the back who was banging on the door with his fist, clearly trying to flush me out to the front. It was downright horrifying. To make matters worse, the plate number my boss had caught turned out to be unregistered. It's been quite a while since this incident, but no progress has been made. The only good news to come out of the whole thing is that my boss doesn't make me work alone anymore. Despite that, I'm still extremely uneasy anytime I'm scheduled for a night shift. I still question how they knew I'd be working alone. It doesn't make any sense. Even now, I often think about what would have happened had I given in to fear and run out the front door.